All right, so today is February 7th, 2025, and this is Stephen Theccanat representing the City of Savannah's Municipal Archives as a volunteer from the Learning Center, Senior Citizens Incorporated. I'm interviewing Charlotte Beran for the Everyone Has a Story project through the Savannah Community Memory Project. We are conducting this interview at our house. Thank you for joining me today. So let's start by having you tell me your full name.
My name is Charlotte Castleberry Beran.
And could you spell that for me?
CHARLOTTECastleberrybEran.
Excellent, thank you. So maybe we could start a little bit about when and where you were born.
I was born in Midland, Texas. My father was in the oil business. That's why we were living in Midland. I didn't live there very long, but that is where I was born.
Okay, very good. And tell me a little bit about your household composition, which order you were in.
I was the last child out of 4 for my father and the last child out of 3 for my mother. I have a half sister who's 15 years older than I am. I don't know her very well. And then my father, it was a failed marriage and they got a divorce and he married my mother and they adopted my older brother, Frank, because they didn't think they could have children. And then my sister May was the miracle child and I was the reason for birth control, I think.
Good.
But I was the last child and lucky to be there. I had a good family and good parents, really good parents.
Very good. Is there some memory that you have from childhood that really stands out as something significant or something that you remember a lot? You may not have one, but that's okay.
I remember when John F. Kennedy was killed.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
I was in school and they sent everybody home. It was a big deal. You know, I was very young though. I was born in 1955, so I can't have been that old. But I do remember they sent everybody home. And we were living in Denver, Colorado at the time. And we were from Texas. And we were given, some people were very unkind because they associated the fact that we were from Texas with the assassination of John F. Kennedy. So there was some unpleasantness there. We didn't do anything, but we were blamed.
Oh. And how did that affect you think?
I thought those people were stupid.
Mm-hmm.
No, it didn't bother me that much. I just thought it was ridiculous.
Okay. So it means you moved from Texas to Colorado. How old were you?
Actually, we lived in Midland, and then we moved to Canada, Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and then back to Tyler, Texas, then to Houston, Texas, then to Denver, Colorado. By the time we moved to Denver, I was probably in 2nd grade, so they did a lot of moving around.
And what caused that?
My father was in the oil business, and he was very ambitious, and back in those days, moving people from place to place was what a lot of corporations did. I don't know why, really. I guess to give them extra experience or whatever, and they would pay to move the whole family, and we did and then we moved to Denver, and then when I was in 6th grade, we moved to Dallas, Texas, because my father got tired of being cold, he told me. And he took early retirement from Atlantic Richfield, which was the company he worked for in the oil business. And we moved back to Texas, and he became a stockbroker for a while, but that did not work out. And then he went back into the oil business again, and he worked for a very notable family called the Murchisons, and worked with them until he retired.
Okay. So it means you didn't stay too long in each town when you kept moving, like a year?
Yes, one of them I think was just 6 months. But Denver was like 4 years, so that was good. And Dallas, we just stayed, you know. But I think it was harder on my brother than my sister and I. I didn't really like moving and having to make new friends all the time, but I think it was good for me. It taught me versatility.
Oh, very good. And why do you think it was harder on your brother?
He was emotionally troubled. He was what they called it manic depressive back in those days, and I think that kind of equates to bipolar now. And he was probably going to be troubled wherever we went, really.
How was that for you, growing up with somebody who had psychiatric problems?
It was painful, frightening sometimes because his temper was difficult. But I think it really kind of made me a little bit nicer and more understanding of people with mental health problems. I loved him. He died a few years ago of lung cancer. I loved him. My sister resented him, but she was older and had a different perspective.
Okay. And then and how about your mother? What employment did she have, or was she?
She was homemaker, that's what they called it. But really, she was an artist and raised the kids and really didn't do a whole lot of cooking. Was a lot more interested in painting her paintings and making sculpture. And my father was just a wonderful person and extremely supportive of this. And he didn't really care if we had a fancy meal or not. We pretty much had rote meals, kind of knew what we were going to have. It was pretty simple. My father would grill chicken and she'd open a can of green beans or whatever. But we didn't care. It was a nice home. It was. And my mother was wonderful because she taught me an appreciation of art that I think not everybody has that opportunity. She took us to the museums wherever we went, and always the Dallas Museum of Art, we would frequent it, and it was a wonderful, wonderful upbringing.
Very good. So I know you went to different schools, but then after you finished, and you finished regular high school?
I did. I went to sixth grade in Dallas, Texas, and then junior high, and then high school. And I did skip my senior year because I didn't really like it, and it was simple to do because I was a good student and I'd taken all the classes I needed. But the time I was a junior, except for one class which I took in the summer, so I could skip my senior year, and I went to college at the University of Texas in Austin, which was wonderful. It was 4 hours from home, and I wanted to spread my wings and try out being an adult, and really, or wasn't really an adult at that age, but I thought I was.
So you were 17?
No, I was 18, because when we moved from Canada back to Texas, they put me back a year, and it annoyed me. And my father and mother even said, we should have known you'd want to do this because it annoyed you when you got put back a year. Huh. So I was 18.
Okay.
I was old for my age in school, but in my head, I think I wasn't very mature anyway, so it was just as well.
Okay, good. And what about, what was your major in college?
I took a BS in advertising. I loved art. And I even mentioned to my father that I might like to study art, and he did look at me and say, I just don't see you poor. And I thought about it, and I thought, I don't see me poor either. I don't have to be rich, but I don't want to be poor. So I tried to take a major that was more practical, because I intended to work. I wasn't getting an MRS degree. That wasn't my purpose.
And that was your final degree?
Yes, it was a BS in advertising, or a Bachelor of Science in Communications. That's what it was. Okay.
And then what did you do after you graduated?
I went to work for an ad agency when I first graduated. It was a small ad agency, but I learned a lot there. And then after that, I went to work for the Dallas Morning News. And I went to, I was actually like the fifth woman on their sales force, their outside sales force. It was, I guess it was around 1980, and it was pretty backwards back then when it came to hiring women in professional positions. But I was there, and I was lucky that they hired me. And I loved the job. I didn't realize I'd love it. I was kind of an introvert until I got into the sales world. Actually, no, I worked for a newspaper in Austin before I did that. I forgot about that. I worked for an ad agency, and then I was married to a man that I did not stay married to very long, but we moved together down to Austin for a job that he got, and I worked for a small newspaper there, and then we moved back to Dallas, and then I went to work for the Dallas Morning News. That's what I did, and I loved it.
And your role there was?
I was outside sales. They'd give you a sales territory. Different parts of the city were partitioned off, and you had the cross streets, everything within those cross streets you'd call on. And I did that for many years. And then I got promoted to fashion. There was a fashion specialty, and I called on all the fashion stores. And then I got promoted to department stores, which was the best job there. And I called on department stores for several years. And then they reorganized and decided to come out with a fashion magazine to compete with another fashion magazine in Dallas. And they recruited me to work there because of my background in history. And I really loved that part of the job. I enjoyed it. I got to go to New York and call on the fashion houses, and it was a fun job. And now, of course, I called on all the local fashion people too, and I traveled to Seattle to see Nordstrom, and yeah, that was probably the best part of my job, and it actually protected me because that was like 2001, and the internet had been invented, okay, and so the first thing that went with the newspaper was classified advertising, and that was the cash cow for all newspapers. That's where they made the majority of their money. People calling in and running these little tiny advertisements in the paper. That's where they made all their money, and a lot of people didn't even realize that. My office was the more glamorous office, but we didn't make as much money as classified did. But that went away. That was the first thing to go away with the internet. But the newspaper was, every year we were losing subscribers. And so I was kind of insulated with that when I worked on the fashion magazine. And they closed the fashion magazine in 2012 because it never made enough money. And actually the publisher that was in charge at the time kind of spent money foolishly and messed it up, drove it into the ground. And they laid everybody off except for me. And the general manager of the Dallas Morning News, who happened to be an old boss of mine, called me in and told me he had to lay everybody off, but he was able to save my job, which I don't think I really wanted. But I kept it. So he put me back on the newspaper again, and by then it was greatly diminished. I mean, we had a circulation of like 750,000, and I have a girlfriend that still works there. Okay, right now it's 2025, the year 2025. Got a girlfriend that still works there, and the circulation's down to 100,000. Wow. That's a pitiful amount of people reading the newspaper, So it was after 2012. Let's say I worked from 2012 to 2019. I retired, I retired in 2018. I retired in June of 2018, and I was ever so happy to quit because I was selling more than just newspaper. I was selling direct mail. I was selling the internet. I was selling Facebook ads. But part of my job, I felt like the little Dutch boy with the finger in the dike. Part of my job was they had me handling a lot of the department stores and the big accounts. Every year they'd go down $1 million. Every year another $1 million. Yet they'd give me goals where I'm supposed to make more money than the year before. It was just difficult. Wow. So I was happy to retire.
There's a lot of pressure.
Luckily, it would have been pressure if I was younger. I didn't feel pressured. I actually felt like I had clients I really liked, and I felt like they probably shouldn't be running ads with me.
But you were able to meet your goals, though.
Sometimes yes, okay. And sometimes no.
Okay.
But I actually was able to bring. They gave rewards for people that brought in new business, and I was very good at that.
Good.
But I felt bad about like the sweet people that had been with the newspaper forever, and I kept giving them, they'd run in the paper and we, give them added value in online ads, but it wasn't fun to sell anymore. So I was happy to retire.
Huh.
Does that make sense?
Yes. You mentioned that you were like the 5th woman to be hired, was it? And how was that working in a male?
It was so interesting, actually. I was young, I was naive, but I had worked for a small newspaper in Austin before that. But it was a giant room, and what was that TV show? Mary Tyler Moore was in it, and she was in a newsroom. It kind of reminded me of that show. It was this giant room. There were no partitions, all these desks lined up, and a bunch of old white guys. That's pretty much what it was. And then me and 4 other women. And it was a bunch of old white guys, no blacks, there was one Hispanic guy, Mike Panetta. And actually after they hired me, they hired their first black woman into that office. But they were slow changing for the better. But they were probably faster than a lot of corporations, but I was just in on it, and it was interesting. I even had, and then they started hiring more women. I even had a girlfriend who had a client call her manager and say he wanted to work with a man, not a woman. So they sent one of the gay guys out.
That's a good one.
We thought it was a good one.
Good. And what was your experience working with all these men who may not have wanted you there? I'm not sure.
It was interesting. I didn't feel unwanted, but who knows? I was so nervous and anxious to do a good job. And actually, the guy that sat behind me, his name was Hal Cooley, and he smoked, had a giant ashtray full of cigarette butts, and he kept some bourbon in his lower right-hand drawer. This is the kind of office I was in. But he was a pussycat. He was the nicest man, and he gave me so much good advice. He was kind to me. But he would call his clients, I'd hear him, and he'd call them and say, "Sober enough to talk?" He had a good sense of humor. He was different. He wasn't anything like anybody I'd ever known before, but he was a really nice man, and he gave me good advice. And no, I didn't feel unwelcome.
Good.
I didn't.
Good. Is there anything you could say that job taught you, being in that industry?
Well, I was kind of introverted. I was probably what people would call an introvert before I went into sales. And because I drove around when I first started for 4 days without making a sales call at that job in Austin because I was so terrified. And then I realized they'd fire me if I kept that up. So I finally started making sales calls. And I learned that talking to strangers is not hard. And actually, I loved learning about different businesses. I thought that was fascinating, how it worked, who it attracted. It was fun. I liked it.
Did moving around so much during your early childhood, did that in any way help you kind of connect to strangers? Because you had to do that.
I've always been kind to strangers because I know what it's like to be a stranger. But I was kind of scared to make those sales calls, so I don't know. I do go out of my way to be kind to people just because, especially new people, because I was always the odd, for many times I was the odd person out. And it's not a good feeling.
Right, okay.
So.
What made you, retire in 2018? What triggered all that?
Well, it's so funny. We were on vacation in Europe with some very good friends. My friends Daryl and John were with us. My husband and I were there. We caught a plane from Paris to Amsterdam, and Daryl and John have longtime friends. Daryl was president of a big bank in Dallas, and John, very analytical computer programmer guy, and they've always given us advice on our finances and that sort of thing. And I was sitting with Daryl on the plane to Amsterdam, and I told Daryl that I was just really not enjoying my job anymore. And he said, "Well, Miss Charlotte, I think you ought to quit. You have plenty of money. You saved correctly. You'll be fine. Your portfolio looks good." And I said, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah, I'm surprised you stayed on as long as you did." And I said, "Well, I would like to quit." And he said, well, let me help you write the email. Because at the time, I was working for my most favorite boss ever. Of course.
Mm-hmm.
When I finally decided to quit, I quit on somebody I actually cared about. So I had to give him 3 weeks notice, and I sent him an email. And it just basically said that we wrote it in such a way that he knew I was done. But I said it very nicely, and when we got back, I trained. Actually, he hired somebody that I had recommended to him, and so I trained very hard with her. And she even called me after I was retired with questions because I wanted her to succeed. You know, I helped her.
Good. And you, even I guess now, still feel good that you retired when you did?
I feel good that I retired when I did, and I don't know how I managed to get everything done in my day now because I'm ever so busy, it seems. And I love being retired. I enjoy it. I read books. I stream shows on the TV. I get to ride my bike and exercise as much as I want, which is nice because you're always trying to fit everything in when you're working. And I love it. It's a wonderful life.
What brought you to Savannah?
Well, we had some friends that worked for the Dallas Morning News, a friend that worked for the Dallas Morning News, and he was laid off in 2004. And he and his wife moved to a place called Tybee Island, Georgia, which is just outside of Savannah. And we were their first guests after they moved there. We went to visit them, and we thought, this is a really charming place. And they took us into Savannah, and we thought, even more charming. A very nice sized town with lots of history and beautiful architecture right there. And I thought, and we'd always talked about living on the coast when we retired, but never thought where. But Paul and I, my husband and I, looked at each other and said, this might be it. And then in 2000, we started visiting every year, once or twice a year.
Starting from which year?
Starting in 2004. After they moved there, and we'd visit in 2005, and then we started renting a place because you don't want to be, the bad penny that turns up too many times in somebody's house. So we started renting places, and when we were there in 2008, we almost had our house in Dallas paid off. We were really close. I thought after we paid off our house in Dallas, we could buy a small house on Tybee and rent it out because people were doing that. That's kind of the vacation rental thing had just started up, and so we weren't supposed to buy a house when we were there, but we did because I found one. That's about when the banks were panicking. 2008, there was a big recession. The banks had lent money unwisely, and they were panicking and trying to get money back into their coffers. And so we stumbled upon this house that had been repossessed by a builder, and it was extremely well priced. And so I went home and told I went with Daryl and John to look at it. And Daryl was there again. He's always there in big moments in my life, it seems like. He looked at me, we were looking at that house, and he said, Miss Charlotte, if you don't buy this house, I will. So went home and woke Paul up, who was sleeping in, and he said, I want to buy a house. And I said, we have to. It's too good of a deal. So we bought it and fixed it up and made it into a vacation rental and used it as a vacation rental till we moved here in 2019. We moved here in May of 2019.
Very good. Okay, and what about you mentioned Paul, but in general, your immediate family would include?
My immediate family had by the time I retired, my mother and father had already passed away. I'm very close to my sister, May, who at the time lived in Sag Harbor, New York. And my brother had passed away in 2015, I think. And Paul's mother was still living in Dallas, but really there wasn't much else other than some close friends that really mattered to us there.
Okay. And marriage, so you're currently married to Paul.
I'm married to Paul. I've been married to Paul for 31 years. He's a wonderful, wonderful, good, kind, funny man. When I met him, he was working for a direct mail company and did that for many, many years, 17 years. And then he was laid off and went to work for a printing company and did that for about a year and got laid off because the printing company was in trouble. And then he finally got a job at an IT outsourcing company called CompuCom and I was really proud of him. He got a middle management job. And had to learn a whole new vocabulary, a whole new business, and he did very well at it. And that was his final job before he retired.
Very good. Did he retire around the same time you did?
He retired ahead of me because that company also had layoffs, and they let go of his entire department. And he was in his 50s by then, and that was the time when a lot of people in that age bracket nobody wanted really. And he tried to find a job, but he couldn't. He really couldn't. He tried for 2 years and it was tiresome for him. And finally I looked at him and I said, why don't you just forget about it? I make enough money for the both of us. I've always done very well at my job. I was doing very well. I said, why don't you do this? Why don't you just take care of the house, which you kind of always already did anyway. And actually it turned out wonderfully. It made it a lot easier for me to do my job because I didn't have to worry about groceries or anything. He'd already kind of been doing that anyway, but he took the whole thing over. And so probably the last 10 years he didn't work while I was working, but it worked out. It worked out really well.
And any children?
No children. We forgot to have children. But we did discover a daughter through 23andMe about a year ago. Paul didn't know he fathered a child, but he did. And she's lovely. She's 39, about to be 40. Just had her second son, so now we have 2 grandsons. And it's a delightful, wonderful, unexpected event in life. And I feel terribly lucky.
Very good.
To have this. And they live in Houston, Texas. She's an environmental attorney and he's in computer work. I'm not exactly sure what he does, but it's a wonderful thing.
Very good. And so you're in touch, you and Paul are in touch with her?
Weekly.
Good.
We hear from her weekly. It's wonderful.
Excellent. What is your connection to the Learning Center at Senior Citizen Incorporated?
Well, so I made friends with these really fabulous men that live in Savannah. I took a class at the Telfair Museum to learn how to become a docent because I thought that might be something I'd like to do, in my spare time. And also I love art, and maybe I'll meet somebody I like there because as much as I like Tybee, the people on Tybee are perhaps not as cerebral as I had expected. And so I was looking for some friends that were more, interested in some of the things I was interested in. And I did make friends with this guy named Lou Story, who I am so lucky to still, be friends with, and his husband, Steve Theccanat. And they introduced me to the Learning Center. And so now I go to classes there and enjoy myself thoroughly.
What do you like about the classes there?
I like that they're really well done. They're not hokey pokey. They're truly serious learning experiences. And there's only one that made me sleepy. There's one I could have done without, but that's a pretty good track record because I've taken a lot of classes there.
Right.
And I just like learning new things. I always have.
Very good. Any other organizations or places of worship or any other entities apart from the Learning Center that you're part of?
Other than being a member at the Telfair Museums, no, not really. I was I was part of the Tybee Women's Spades group for a while, but I didn't really enjoy it, so I've just sort of stopped going because I don't know, spades is all right, but I just stopped going. It wasn't for me.
Okay.
I am kind of I like being alone. I'm a very I'm not a big joiner of things so much.
Okay. All right. How might you describe this stage of your life?
How would I describe it? It's peaceful. It's mostly wonderful. My husband's had some health issues. That part I could do without because that was a lot of worry. But some of the worry is going away now. The last few years have been difficult, but the last couple of years have gotten better because I'm not as worried about him as I was before. But so yeah, it's a great part of my life. I'm feeling very blessed and lucky, and grateful for what I have.
Very good. Any other significant events that have happened in your life? I know you mentioned one of them, but any other significant events that really stand out?
Well, 911, nobody's going to forget that. September 11th, 2001. I was still working for the newspaper. I was working in the satellite office. That was before I went into the magazine. I was a manager over a group of salespeople. It was a satellite office in Carrollton, Texas. And I was getting ready for work to go to work that day. And Paul stuck his head out of the bathroom and said, "Somebody just flew a plane into a building." And I said, "Are you kidding me? Who's going to believe that?" And I said, I guess, I did say, "Was anybody hurt?" which was really stupid. And Paul said, "Yeah, I think so." It was really stupid. But I just was so shocked. Who would, And I did go ahead and go into work. And there's a newsroom there. So I was in the newsroom and there was TVs on and it was quite active and devastating. It was devastating. And probably by midday, I sent everybody home because I was the sales manager. Nobody was going to talk to us. Everybody was just devastated and felt terrible about the whole thing. And it was so sad. My sister was actually in New York when it happened and she saw the buildings go down.
Wow.
She was visiting a friend of hers who had a very nice high-rise condo with a view of the Twin Towers, and
she watched it?
She watched it. Wow. She watched the fire engines head there and not come back. Her son was, James was probably about 6 or 7 at the time, and she put him in therapy afterwards because she was very worried about what he saw. And I don't blame her. I would have done the same thing.
Were you then worried about her too, getting in touch with her during that event?
I didn't know she was in New York, so I didn't have to worry. They were living in Sag Harbor, so I didn't have any idea she was there. But it was a relief that nothing happened to her. And I have some friends that lived on the Upper East Side. And I remember his sister, who was also a friend of mine, told me she called Jay Lacey and said, "Jay, New York's under attack." He worked in the Empire State Building. And she said, "You need to go home. You need to get out." So everybody was pretty shaken by the whole thing.
Does this in any way affect you even now? What happened on 9/11?
I think it changed everybody just a little bit.
How about you specifically?
Me specifically, I'm more cautious. I will tell you, for years, I got on an airplane, I'd look around and see who was seated there. And if they looked like international terrorists or not. I did do that.
Would you then get off the plane?
No. I would just try to decide if I needed to get my handbag handy to thwap him one. But
that's gotten better.
And actually, after we were supposed to go visit Dan and David in New York, and I don't know why I didn't worry about them. They were there, but I didn't. But we were supposed to go visit them a few weeks afterwards, and I canceled the trip because I didn't want to get on a plane. I was disturbed by the whole thing. And Dan and David these are some very good friends of ours that we've known for all our lives and most of our adult lives. And they couldn't understand why we didn't want to come and get on a plane. They didn't get it.
And they lived in New York City.
They lived on Staten Island.
Oh, I see.
We're really close to New York. But yeah, we were like, no, I don't think so. Thanks, but no thanks.
But you're still in touch with them.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
Friends for life.
Very, very good. What about your experience with the COVID pandemic? Do you want to talk about that? How it affected you?
That was terrifying, but we were the lucky ones. I had already retired. We had already moved from Dallas, Texas to Tybee Island. And it was, if I had to go to work, that would have been so much harder. And I was just grateful that we didn't have to get out and about like other people did. And I felt terrible for the people that had to experience that. I felt like I was in a science fiction film. And I've always kind of enjoyed science fiction books, but this wasn't a good book. And watching all those people dying and no answers and poor leadership, it was a tough time. It was a very tough time. And I'm just, grateful that they came up with a vaccination, and I feel terrible for the people that lost people to it.
Did anything personally affected you? Any losses?
No, not really. Not really, but I did go to a museum party that was hosted by a woman that I think her name was Ann Tenenbaum, and both of her parents had a place in the DeSoto, which is a high-rise here in town. It was a beautiful condo. It was a penthouse is what they had, and it was a museum party, a Telfair museum party we went to, and both of her parents had died in New York. They were visiting in New York. They got the COVID. They died, and was such a lovely, and they had a lovely art collection that we were able to see, but she was hosting it after they had died, and I felt so terrible for her. I know, of course, I didn't say a word to her about it, but I just knew, and my heart went out to her, because how could you, that'd just be a terrible experience.
Right. Wow. And were you in any way, were there any issues with you wearing masks or getting vaccinated, living on Tybee?
We wore masks. First of all, we didn't go very many places, and we didn't have people to the house because I didn't want to take those chances. Until they had the vaccinations, we were very, very careful. If we had to go someplace, we wore masks. Paul had to have a back surgery, and I do remember taking him to the hospital during the COVID, and it was like an 8-hour day surgery on his back, and I stayed in the car because I wasn't going in there, and took him home. So we maneuvered, and we had all our groceries delivered. It almost felt like we were in a little capsule away from everybody else. We did have some neighbors that we would talk to outside. And my husband loves to watch the news, but God, every time I passed that TV, it was just one horror after another.
Wow.
It was a very painful time for me. And I'm an upbeat personality. So the people that are not upbeat personalities, that must have been really hard.
And does it in any way continue to affect you right now?
I don't think so. I think there's going to be illness, and we were lucky. We didn't catch it early on when they didn't know what to do.
Did you get it at all?
I have had it 2 or 3 times. The first time it didn't feel like much at all. Let me think, how many times have I had it? 2 or 3 times. And then the last time I had it, I didn't feel so good. And my good friend Steve told me to get Paxlovid, and I did, and that helped a lot. It was a little scary that time.
But it looks like you fully recovered.
I did. I'm just fine.
Good. Very good. Okay. How is your relationship with, you mentioned you have a nephew, James?
Yes, he's the apple of my eye. That and our daughter, who we are just getting to know. But James Fitzgerald is my sister's son, and he is a hardworking young man who is about to go to law school. He has been accepted at Yale Law School and Stanford Law School, and he hasn't made up his mind. Now, his parents no longer live in Sag Harbor. They live in Lakeville, Connecticut, which is really 20-minute drive from the last train into New York. I think that's why they position themselves there, because they go in and out of New York, because Michael's an art historian in May, used to work for the MoMA, designing collectible art books. And they love the art world, so they go in and out quite a lot, but I digress. James is probably about 26 or 27 years old. He went to Williams for college, and then he got into Oxford, and then he got a scholarship at Cambridge and took 2 master's degrees there. And he's working for a company called B Carbon right now out of Houston, Texas, which is has to do with protecting the environment. And he wants to become an environmental attorney. He's very concerned about the environment and wants to try to keep people from ruining our beautiful world. I think it's a good calling.
Mm-hmm. Good. So it looks like you have a good relationship with him.
Yeah.
Excellent.
We love him. He's a wonderful young man.
Very good. How about anything in general about the world that concerns you or makes you happy, or anything that you want to talk about? Or
well, I'm not happy that Donald Trump was elected president. I think he's not very smart. I think he's a loose cannon. I think he is going to mess a lot of things up. But he was elected legally, and I'm just going to have to wait out 4 years. And I truly believe that by the time he's done, the country will swing the other way. And I hope I'm right. That I find very alarming. Everything about him is alarming to me. I can barely look at the TV if he's on the TV. That's how much I dislike the man. He's a convicted felon. He's a rapist. He's everything I despise.
any of his actions directly impacted you, or do you see it more of a general impact?
It's a general, I mean, I don't think it's really hurt me personally, other than I find it very offensive that we would elect that kind of person to the highest office in the United States.
Okay. Do you have any hopes about the future?
I have hopes. Yeah, I hope that a better regime will be elected in, and that we will make better decisions and do things to make the world a better place. And I don't really think he's doing that right now.
Okay.
He talked about stepping back and not getting involved in the world, which I disagreed with.
Mm-hmm.
But now he's talking about making the Gaza Strip into a new Riviera, which I think he's insane. And it tells me he really didn't do very well in school, because if he'd studied any history at all, he'd know this would be a disaster. Check out Vietnam. He's just a driveling idiot, in my opinion.
Okay. This is very good. Anything else that you think, because this goes into the Savannah archives for people to research and to check up on certain things that they may want to do as part of their studies.
Right.
Is there anything else that you've said a lot of things, very interesting, very useful things. Anything else that you'd like to add that you might feel it's important.
I don't know. I can't. Have I missed anything that you can think of?
No, I mean,
You
I think
know me well.
we talked about a lot of things.
Yeah.
Okay, but this is good. I think this is very good. So thank you so much for sharing your memories with me today, and this will definitely be going into the archives for the benefit for the future. Thank you again.
Okay. Bye.